Well, hello again. How are you? Welcome to my silly little videos I like to call Crime Dive. My name is Crystal Sky, and if you're anything like me, like at all, you find yourself drawn to true crime cases. So that's what I talk about. If you like true crime and you want to feel better about your makeup skills, because I really don't know what I'm doing, you should absolutely like, subscribe, and yeah, let's hang out every Tuesday where I'll take a deep dive look into a true crime case while slapping on the old face. I hope you all had a wonderful 2 weeks away while I was away anyway. Definitely needed to catch up on a lot of stuff. I was able to cast extras for that movie last month and I just fell behind on everything. So I hope my videos last month didn't feel too rushed or anything. I was really like getting in on the deadline there and I fell behind on research and I have just been playing catch up. Also, my dad sent me this silly little shirt. I always say at the end, don't be a dick, because, you know, that's like Will Wheaton's like anti-bullying, you know, like campaign slogan. And yeah, my dad went ahead and got a little shirt made for me. So yeah, I just thought that was funny. So I just wanted to wear it. And real quick, before we get into today's case, I saw that I hit over 300 subscribers, which is just really wild to me. Just blows my mind. Thank you so much. I'm so happy that like there's over 300 people that would find me interesting enough to, you know, subscribe and watch my little videos. Thank you so much. And I am trying to catch up on comments. Like I said, I fell behind on everything last month. So I am trying to catch up on comments. And yeah, just thank you so much. I kind of feel repetitive when I answer comments because like, yeah, I don't know what else to say other than, you know, thank you so much. Thank you for your sweet comments. They're just, they totally make my day. I'm just blown away by them. Yeah, they're super sweet. I'm sorry, I'm awkward. I don't really know how to take compliments or anything. So yeah, just thank you so much. Also, thank you for anyone and everyone who has dropped case suggestions down in my comments. I am already hot on it. Do not worry. It might take a while because again, I do a little bit of, you know, deep dives here, but yeah, drop some case suggestions and I will totally check them out. I love getting case suggestions. And I think that is all of the updates. Yeah, I think that was everything that I wanted to say. So let's go ahead and talk about today's case, all right? So today's case, yes, it is another serial killer case. I know, but it's kind of different in that, so technically this guy's a serial killer because we know he's killed at least 5 people, but it's just, I don't know, it's not as simple as that. It's a very nuanced one today, and there's not a whole lot of deep dive information. It's really pretty difficult to find a lot of information on this case, so I dug as deep as I could and wanted to talk about this case with y'all. Today, we will be talking about Howard Neal, who slipped through the cracks of the system and became a serial killer. Yeah, it's, like I said, it's a nuanced one today, and I think what makes this even more frustrating, not only are there 2 children victims in this case, like with a lot of true crime cases, this could have totally been prevented. So yeah, we'll get all into that. Disclaimer wise, let's see. I don't think we're talking about anything too gruesome. Like I said, there are, you know, 2 victims who are children who did, you know, die in this case. Some people get really kind of weird when it comes to child death and child victims. So I think that's probably the only disclaimer you would need for today's case. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get into Howard Neal. So Howard Montville Neal, all right? He was born September 14th, 1953 in Ellisville, Mississippi. His parents were Alvin Neal and Johnny Davis. Yes, his mother's name was reportedly Johnny. Like I said, it was kind of tough to find information about Howard. It was pretty difficult. His childhood and upbringing, they were described as, quote, nightmarish, traumatic, and pretty abusive. He did not have a great upbringing or childhood. And Howard was one of 11 siblings. Yeah, one of 11. And they weren't all full-blooded siblings. We're talking a lot of half-siblings as well. And I think these siblings came from both of Howard's parents. Now, one of Howard's sisters, her name is Marianne Mcneese. I am unclear if she is a full-blooded sister or half-sister. And I'm not even even sure if, yeah, her and Howard have the same mother or what, but she did have a childhood with Howard, and she did spend time in the same house as him. And she described what it was like growing up in the McNeil household. 11 children with 2 parents living in a 2-bedroom home. Howard's father, again, not sure if it's Marianne's father as well, but Howard's father was an abusive alcoholic who was said to have been especially abusive towards young Howard. Howard has says that one time his dad actually drowned his dog in a creek in front of him, and he also accused his father of sexually abusing him as well. That's just Howard's claims of it. He claims that's how abusive his father was. Now, according to Howard's mother, Howard attended school till he was around 10 years old. Up until he was around 10 years old, Howard was attending public school like everyone else. But by the time he was approaching 10, it was pretty clear and obvious at that point that Howard wasn't exactly like the other children. It was clear that he was a wee bit slower in learning, a wee bit slower talking about development-wise and learning-wise. And it is also around the same time that Howard's parents split up. And even though Howard had attended school till he was 10 years old, I read several sources that said his official education level is 2nd grade, and he could not read or write. Howard's IQ has been tested, and it tests anywhere between 54 and 60. So Howard is certainly a little slower. It was pretty evident at that point that he was not learning at the same rate or at the same pace as the other children. And he was described as having the mental capacity of an 8-year-old as well. So yeah, even though Howard had attended public school up until 10 years old, he always had trouble learning and remembering things. That was a very big struggle for him. And teachers did say that even though they tried and Howard tried, he fell behind his classmates and fell way behind. And so by the time he's 10 and all this is pretty evident that a public education is just not the best thing for Howard right now because he keeps falling behind. It was suggested to his mother that he transfer to Ellisville. And this was a school for mentally disabled children. And it was suggested to his mother that she put Howard there at that point, that maybe there he could, find people who could help him learn to the best of his ability. They told her he would learn a trade there. And it just kind of seemed like the best option at the time. Now, his mother, Johnny, she claims that she tried to see Howard as often as she could when he went to Ellisville, but she rarely saw him. And Howard was described as being virtually abandoned by both his mother and father after going to Ellisville. He was virtually abandoned. And like I said, he had 11 siblings, and his mother had went ahead and gotten them adopted, but nobody wanted Howard. And so that's when she decided to listen to officials and send him off to Ellisville. I don't know why this woman had so many children and then just went and got them all adopted or something. I'm a little unclear. Like I said, it was hard to get accurate information about this case, maybe because it was so far back, and so records from that time are a little sketch at best. But yeah, I don't know why, but that's how it was described, is that he was already slow. It was pretty evident, and they told her that you should probably just put him in Ellisville. And yeah, it is said that his other siblings got adopted, but no one wanted Howard, and so she sent him to Ellisville. I was like, okay. Now, at Ellisville, all right, workers who worked there, both on the staff and on the teaching, they described Howard as a, quote, good worker, a, quote, likable kid, and someone who, quote, got along with the other kids. So it seems that Howard is taking to Ellisville, which is great. And some of the employees, they really took to Howard, and they kind of felt sorry for his home life situation. They knew that his parents had virtually abandoned him, and he never had visitors or anything, or family. And some of the workers, because he was such a sweet, likable kid, they, got a soft spot for Howard. One worker named Lamar Collum, he was an Ellis School bus driver, and he also worked at the cafeteria. And he was one of the workers who really took to Howard and really took pity on him and really developed, kind of a little relationship with him, really liked him. He would sometimes give Howard some spare change and spare money, and Howard would usually go and spend it at the local canteen and stuff. Now, even though Howard is excelling at Ellisville, or not excelling, but he's doing well there, he's adapting, he does have a few notes in his record about some behavioral problems that he apparently developed. violent. He would reportedly pick on smaller children. He would run away, and he would always neglect to express any remorse for any wrongdoing that he was caught doing. Some reports describe Howard's behavioral problems as spasmodic, which means occurring or done in brief, irregular bursts. So it seems that though he did have some behavioral problems, they were not like a normal, everyday, common occurrence. It was done irregularly and suddenly out of nowhere. Like Howard had problems kind of controlling his emotions a little bit almost. And there were notes in his file that did ask those questions that wondered, like, can he control his emotional state? There were rumors that Howard had engaged in homosexual relationships while at Ellisville. And later, a psychologist would diagnose Howard with, quote, psychosexual confusion, which is a lack of definitive identity with either the male or female role. And I wonder if today, if Howard would, like, I don't know, maybe be classified as, like, I don't know, like non-binary or something? I don't know, because remember, this is, you know, this is like the 50s and 60s. So, you know, we've learned quite a lot since then. And I wonder how Howard at Ellisville, I wonder how he would be diagnosed today. Now, later on in his life, Howard would go on to say and claim that he did suffer abuse while at Ellisville, both at the hands of fellow students and staff. So I don't know, it's kind of weird. Like, it seems like there were definitely some upsides of Howard being at Ellisville. It seemed like, you know, he did get along with other kids, but he did have some behavioral problems. But again, they were described as almost like having like almost like sudden outbursts, you know? And again, this is pretty, you know, important for later. Like, yeah, there were questions like, is he unable to control his emotions, like his emotional state, you know what I mean? Because remember, Howard, you know, he does have a low IQ. It is said that he has the mental capacity of an 8-year-old. So I don't know. There's definitely some ups and downsides of Howard being at Ellisville, right? But there were no upsides. When Howard turned 16, he like aged out of Ellisville. And so at 16, he was transferred to Whitfield, which was a state-run maximum security mental institution. And here he was institutionalized with 150 chronics is what they were labeled. And these were people who suffered from such severe mental disability, they couldn't even stand trial. And other patients at Whitfield had also expressed aggressive tendencies. And this is where they sent Howard at 16 years old. Now, look, again, even when you take his minor and sporadic behavioral problems into account at Ellisville, like, you can't tell me this was the best place to send 16-year-old Howard. I don't think so. Now, Whitfield was described as not being a very enjoyable place for Howard. It was not a good therapeutic environment, and it was not at all beneficial in Howard's mental prognosis. And apparently at Whitfield, so surprise, surprise, patients did not get the attention or care that they really deserved or needed. It is said even the employees were miserable there. It was just described as just being not a very good place for either the patients or even the employees. Whitfield contained no education, no training, and no recreation for Howard or any of the patients there. Yeah, they were just kind of kept there. Howard said that he suffered abuse at Whitfield as well. And he was at Whitfield until he was about 18, 19 years old. And that's when, like, and that's another thing. I'm not sure, like, if he's discharged, if he, like, aged out of Whitfield. I'm not sure. But when he's, like, 18 or 19 years old, Howard is, I don't know, kicked out of Whitfield. Like, he's not at Whitfield anymore. And he actually goes and stays with his mother for a very brief period of time. But when his mother's husband became disabled and had to draw Social Security and disability, she said Howard was unable to stay there any longer, and so he left. Apparently, his mother was more concerned about, like, drawing her Social Security or, like, welfare or something. I'm not sure what that had to do with Howard staying there, like, how that would affect her welfare benefits or Social Security benefits. I don't know. But yeah, that's what it said, is she cared more about her Social Security or whatever it was that she was drawing, and somehow Howard living with her threatened the amount she was going to get. Like I said, it was really hard to get concrete information. So yeah, she tells Howard, sorry, too bad, you can't live here. So Howard, who is now, you know, like 18, 19 years old, has no education, didn't receive any type of training, any type of skill, has the mental capacity of an 8-year-old, is just kind of left to his own devices. And it's at this time that Howard, he heads over to Oklahoma. And over here, don't know a whole lot of information about his time there, just that while he's there, he is arrested for assault and battery with a dangerous weapon. Don't know the details behind that. I couldn't find that out, what sent him to prison in Oklahoma. But yeah, he was sent to prison in Oklahoma. And again, his time in prison, I mean, nobody's time in prison is described as great. But yeah, Howard's was especially horrible. So due to his mental disability and his cognitive abilities, you know, and his mental state, he was just at the mercy of the other inmates. He was described as being, quote, defenseless and, quote, gullible. And a psychologist who interviewed Howard behind bars and interviewed him pretty intimately, his name's Dr. Thomas Norwood, and he interviewed and talked to Howard, like I said, many times, got to know him pretty well. And he said that Howard was traumatized from his time in prison. So traumatized that he could barely discuss his time in prison. Apparently, there was an incident that Howard told Dr. Norwood about, where about 30 to 40 inmates forced Howard under a table and trapped him there, and then forced him to perform sodomy on all of them in turn, in succession. There was another time where Howard was sexually assaulted by 2 other inmates, and his cellmate was constantly trying to sell Howard behind bars, you know, for sex, so that he could have spending money behind bars. And again, no one's time in prison is described as great, right? But it is said that Howard's was just especially worse because of, you know, his how vulnerable he actually was, you know what I mean? After Howard was ultimately released, Dr. Norwood actually helped Howard out when he got out of prison. He helped him set up Social Security benefits and even helped him get a place to live. And now, again, like I said, it was hard to find concrete information on this case. So again, not a lot of finite details, but there's some details that I know. So from this point onward, Howard's living on his own. He's out of the Oklahoma prison and he's got his Social Security benefits coming in. And around this time, it's about 1976, 1977. And this is when Howard marries his first wife. It was a woman named Glenda Snow, and she was also mildly mentally disabled. Not sure exactly what that meant, but yeah, it is said that she was also mildly disabled. In comparison to Howard, I think she may not have been as severe as him. I'm not sure. So the couple ended up moving to Mississippi. However, their marriage would not last. Glenda's parents, who did not at all approve of the marriage, they broke it up and forced Glenda back home. And it is said that Howard was very, very heartbroken and devastated at this. And apparently there are questions on whether Howard and Glenda produced a child or not. There was apparently, I was listening to his podcast on this case, and they were looking at some records, and there was a Joseph D. Snow born in 1977, and his parents on his birth certificate are listed as Howard Neal and Glenda Snow Bush. And also, when Joseph was just a few weeks old, Glenda's parents adopted and raised him, who were Roy and Betty Snow. So yeah, we don't know if maybe Glenda and Howard had a child, and because of, you know, Glenda's disability, her parents stepped in to raise a child. We don't know. Like I said, there's just not a lot about Howard. There's just not a lot of record. There's not a lot of public record about him. And also, I guess, Glenda's parents and Joseph himself, they're all deceased. So yeah, we can't ask them, so we'll probably never really know. And apparently there's no record as to what happened to Glenda. So shortly after Howard and Glenda broken up, Howard did go back to prison, I think for like some petty crime like theft or maybe assault or something like that, but he did go back to prison. And after getting out again, he's around 27 years old now, he ends up married again after coming out of prison. And this time, his wife is 19-year-old Darla Matthews. Yeah, Howard's 27 and she's 19. Now look, you might say, oh, well, you know, with Howard's, you know, mental capacity, yeah, but still. They ended up having a daughter together named Sabrina, and his life was already kind of hard to piece together before this, but after this, his life is really hard to pin down. He was sort of like a drifter and kind of like a transient of sorts. Remember, in the pre-digital age, it was much easier to just uproot yourself from one town and like go one state over, sometimes even only one county or two over. And it was very easy to just kind of settle a new life. So as a result, we don't really have a lot of minute details about Howard's life up until this point. Like, I don't even know how he met Darla. At one point, the family, Howard, Darla, and Sabrina, they do live in Ludlow, California at one point, and they also ended up living in Wheeler, Texas at another point. And it is here, when they're living in Wheeler, Texas, where Howard, he found work working on an oil rig. And this is also when he makes a very, very terrible decision, is when the family is living in Wheeler, Texas. So, for reasons unknown, Howard took Darla and Sabrina, who was 5 years old at this point. He took them from their home in Wheeler, Texas, and drove them to Brookhaven, Mississippi. And this was in order to go see his older half-brother, Bobby Clifford Neal, who was 41 years old. And this is in January of 1981. So, yeah, Howard decides, you know what, let's go on a family trip. Let's go see my bro over in Mississippi. And so he takes Darla and Sabrina and jets on over. Now, I read that Howard had been laid off from his oil rig job when he takes the family to Mississippi. So maybe that's why he went over there. Because we really don't know, like, why he went over there. There was rumors that Bobby had cash lying around and valuables lying around. So because he was laid off, maybe Howard needed money. We don't know. Another source said, or theorized, that another reason maybe Howard had went over to see his older brother was maybe to confront him. Apparently Bobby did bully Howard when they were young and was pretty mean to him. So maybe that was why. Because the two did not have a lot of contact. Howard didn't really have a lot of contact with any of his extended family, really. And so there's a lot of questions that people ask is like, why? Why did he go over to Mississippi to see Bobby? But for whatever reason, he did. Now, Bobby Clifford Neal, he had been born on March 22nd, 1939, and he was a farmer who also used his carpentry skills to earn extra money, working on local construction crews during like the off season, during the off time. Bobby was divorced and he had a 13-year-old daughter, and her name was Amanda Joy Neal. And Bobby had had Amanda with his ex-wife, Elaine. The couple also had a son named Barry, and Amanda, their daughter, she was born December 29th, 1967, and she split her time between her mother and father's house. Although I did read sources that said that she primarily lived with her mother and she just visited her father on the weekends. And that is what Amanda does on January 23rd, 1981. She is visiting her father and spending the weekend at his farm near Monticello in Lawrence County, Mississippi. Amanda was 13 years old and an 8th grader at North Forest Junior High. So it's Friday, January 23rd, and she heads over to her father's house to, spend her usual weekend with him. And the next evening, on Saturday, Amanda, Bobby, along with her brother Barry, who I think was also visiting as well, they head on over to Bobby's sister, which of course would be Amanda's aunt, Betty Sue Langston. And they were heading over to pick up Betty's daughter so that she could spend the weekend with Amanda at Bobby's farm. Apparently this was a pretty common occurrence where Amanda and her cousin would spend Saturday night at Amanda's father's farm, and then they would all go to church together the next morning. This was pretty common. And so that's what they were doing on this Friday. That's what they were doing on that Saturday, is heading over to Betty Sue's. And yeah, her daughter, which was Amanda's cousin, her name was Melanie Sue Polk. And she was born August 16th, 1968. And she was 12 years old, and she was a 7th grader at Silver Creek Junior High. And the two cousins were very, very close. And like I said, that is why they were heading over. They usually spent the weekend together, usually spent Saturday night together, and then they would go to church on Sunday together. And for some reason, so when they went to go pick up Melanie, for some reason, Barry was going to spend time with his Aunt Betty, and so he stayed at the aunt's house, and then Bobby took the two girls to his house, to his farmhouse. Or his house that happened to be his farm. So Bobby, Amanda, and Melanie, they left Betty's home around 10 p.m. that night, and this is actually the last sighting of all three of them alive. So Howard, he got into town early Sunday morning, January 25th, like around 6 a.m., and he checked Darla and Sabrina into the local motel called Della's Motel. And not long after checking them in, Howard leaves them there and starts driving his green Ford Torino all the way to Bobby's farm. Howard would arrive at his brother's farm at around 9 a.m.-ish, and he saw that Bobby had Amanda and Melanie with him. I also read another source that said Howard actually arrived at his brother's farm pretty early and the three were not home, and so he sat there and waited for them. But either way, a little over an hour later, the four of them leave the home. They leave Bobby's home in Howard's car. And Howard drove, and Amanda and Melanie sat in the front seat while Bobby sat in the back. It is said that Howard then started fondling Amanda's leg and just kind of being inappropriate with her. And Amanda complained about this to her father, who chastised Howard. Rightfully so, am I right? Now, apparently this really upset Howard, and this is when he pulled the car over. And he pulled over near a wooded area and a gravel pit. They were about 15 miles from Bobby's farm at this point, and Howard and Bobby both got out of the car. The two girls remained inside. Howard said that he told them that he and Bobby were going to go take a walk. And so the two men walked quite a bit a ways into the trees, like out of sight of the car. And unbeknownst to Bobby, Howard was packing his gun. And we don't know if the two had words or what preceded this. Maybe if Bobby chastised him some more or what. But Howard then shot and killed his half-brother and just left him there in the woods and walked back to the car. Yeah. Not sure what happened, if there were words exchanged. I don't know if they were walking and Howard just did it all of a sudden, you know, like not sure. But yeah, he sat there and murdered his half-brother and then walked back to the car where the two girls were. Now, when the two girls asked Howard about the shot that they had just heard, Howard said that he had just shot his gun into the air. And when they asked where, you know, Bobby was, he said, well, Bobby decided to walk home. And according to Howard, the girls seemed to buy this explanation. Again, all we have is Howard's word, so who knows? But that's what he claims happened, and that they accepted his explanation without further questions. We do know at one point he did have the girls in the trunk because Amanda managed to scribble her initials on the inside of Howard's trunk. So not sure if after he walked back, he put them in the trunk or what, but he walks back to the car and drives a little ways with the girls. Again, not sure if they're in the seat or in the trunk. We just know at one point in time, Amanda was at least in the trunk because of her initials. See what I mean about this case? Like, there's not a lot of like nitty-gritty details, and there's like a lot of questions left unanswered. But we know that after he walks back to the car and he drives about 5 more miles down the road, pulls over, gets out a blanket, lays it on the ground besides the car, and proceeds to sexually assault Amanda while Melanie sat in the car. He then sexually assaulted Melanie, although I did read other reports that said he attempted to assault her. So I don't know if he just like fondled or molested her, I'm not sure. But he definitely sexually abused and traumatized those girls. That we do know. After he was done, he told Amanda and Melanie to get out of the car and stand next to it, and he had them stand next to each other. He then shot Amanda in the chest, which of course prompted Melanie to scream out of terror, and he quickly silenced her by shooting her in the stomach. He then left the two girls there and drove off. And he picked up his family at the hotel. And when Darla asked how it went with his brother, he said that his brother told him he didn't want him around and that they needed to get out of town. They then drove back to Texas before heading west. They headed to Oregon and then California. There were reports that Darla's brother, who lived in Northern California, had a job for Howard, though it wasn't exactly a legal job. It had to do with like, I don't know, drugs or something, but like Howard didn't want anything to do with it. And that's when the family decided to continue making their way down south in California. Meanwhile, on Sunday evening, when Bobby, Melanie, and Amanda had not come home or come to her home, Betty really began to worry. Finally, at 10 p.m. that night, she drove herself to her brother's house and to his farm, walked up to the front door, and proceeded to just walk inside because the door was unlocked. Now, there was nothing amiss. There was no signs of a struggle or anything like that. But she did notice her brother's glasses on a side table in his room, which was super odd to her because apparently Bobby really couldn't see anything without those glasses, and he never left the house without them. And this was enough for Betty to go and alert the Lawrence County Sheriff's Department, which then organized a search party to look for the two girls and Bobby. And for 10 days, nothing could be found. No trace of either of the girls or Bobby could be found. And then on February 6th, a man named Clifford Brown, he was driving with his wife to his local favorite fishing spot. And that is when he made a gruesome discovery and found Amanda's body. It was lying in a hollow about 10 feet away from a logging road that branched off of Old Highway 27. Amanda was not visible from the road due to the hollow she was in. And I think it was when he pulled off of the Old Highway road onto the side road to go to his watering hole. I think that's when he kind of looked over and he saw what he thought was a pile of rags at first, until he saw her arm sticking out, and that's when he was like, oh my god, that's a body. And when Amanda was found, she was wearing t-shirt and some pajama pants, and she had no shoes or socks on, and there was a single gunshot wound to her abdomen. Her face and head had bruises on it, and it did show signs of strangulation, and also showed signs of being hit with a blunt object. And there was also bruising and lacerations found on her left wrist. And a pathologist would later testify that Amanda's wounds were not immediately fatal, and she could have lived anywhere from 5 minutes to 30 minutes after Howard had shot her. And after a 2-hour search of the area where they found Amanda, they finally found Melanie. She was found about 950 feet away. She was wearing jeans and a t-shirt, but like with Amanda, no socks or shoes, and she had a gunshot to the stomach. And this led some to believe that Amanda had actually dragged herself away from her cousin's body to try and get help before she, passed away. And that's why the two girls were not found together. I know, isn't that poor Amanda? What a terrible way to go. And autopsies could not find any physical evidence of sexual assault on either of the girls. So you're probably wondering why I didn't mention any of the strangulation or anything like that. It's because the only person's word that we have to go on of what happened that day is Howard, and he claims that's how it happened. That's how he killed them. So as far as her showing signs of strangulation and being hit with a blunt object, we don't know. We just do not know. Now, at this point in time, Bobby became a suspect, or at least a person of interest in his daughter and niece's death, because they hadn't found Howard yet. All they had found was Amanda and Melanie, and no one had heard from him. So people were like, oh, did, Bobby take off? And then I'm not sure how the local authorities found out that Howard had been visiting Bobby. Not sure, but they did find out that Bobby's half-brother Howard had come to visit him. They managed to get a photograph of him, probably from one of his, past mugshots or something, and they started passing his photo around asking if anyone had seen him. And the man who owned the Della's Motel that Howard and his family had checked in to, his name was Kenneth Hoffman. He recognized Howard's picture immediately when authorities showed it to him. And after consulting his registration books, he discovered that Howard had indeed stayed there on January 24th. And that he had checked in around about 6:45 or so in the morning. Kenneth also told police that Howard was driving his green Ford Torino. And he said that the reason he remembered Howard, because, authorities were asking, you deal with so many customers a day, why do you remember him? He said he remembered Howard because when he came in and when Kenneth pushed him the registration card to fill out, Howard pushed it back to him and asked him to fill it out. And he produced a Mississippi's driver's license as identification. And so, yeah, that kind of stuck out to the guy. And an APB was then sent out nationwide describing Howard and the crime that he was suspected in, or at least a person of interest in that they needed to talk to. And on March 1st, 1981, Bobby's body was finally found. His body had been discovered by a farmer who had gone walking and wandering around looking for some of his missing cows who had gotten out. And he stumbled upon Bobby's body. And he found Bobby's body on top of a hill in Silver Creek. His arms were were tied behind his back with cotton rope, and a bullet was found in a tree near his body. And he had been shot in the chest, and I think he died pretty quickly. So again, I'm sure you're wondering, like, well, why didn't you say that Howard had tied up Bobby's hands? Because again, the only person we have to go on the events of that day are Howard. And he says him and Bobby got out of the car and walked into the woods of his own free volition. We also don't know how he got the three of them out of Bobby's house. He had a gun, so we don't know, maybe it was under threat of the gun, but because the girls didn't have any like socks or shoes on, they were clearly dressed for like lounging around and stuff. And there's just a lot of questions we just don't have the answers to, because Howard just either cannot or will not, tell the truth. And so, of course, once they find Bobby's body, they immediately like, okay, this is no longer like maybe two brothers who had done this murder. We're pretty sure Howard did all three of these murders. And on March 6th, 1981, thousands of miles away in Stockton, California, Howard was arrested for shoplifting a $2.99 red baseball cap. I read other sources that said it was like a baseball cap pin that you like pin into your hat, but regardless, he shoplifted something silly like that at a New Deal grocery store, and this is where he was caught. So the family, like I said, they had gone back to Texas briefly after the murders, then they had headed to Oregon, and then they headed down to Crescent City, California. I think that might be where Darla's brother lived, and then they had found their way down to Stockton. So a security guard had watched Howard put on the baseball cap or the pin, whatever it was, and try to wear it out of the store without paying. And the police were ultimately called when Howard allegedly offered resistance to the store's security guards. And I guess like he got into a fight with them. So yeah, they called the cops. So when the cops were called, when they searched Howard, they found a .22 caliber pistol, a .44 Magnum pistol, and 2 sets of handcuffs in his car. And so they booked him and charged him with shoplifting and illegal possession of firearms. And this was due to his past felonies. And of course, they run his info through the database, and what do you think pops up? That he was wanted in questioning for the triple murder. Now, at first, Howard tried to deny that he had been in Mississippi in the last 3 years, but he later admitted to police like, yeah, you can prove that I was there. But Howard said that he wasn't going to admit that he was there because then they would kill him, the authorities. And on March 8th, Howard finally confessed to authorities what he had done. He tried to say that Bobby, Amanda, and Melanie all accompanied him into his car voluntarily. I said that earlier. But of course, like we already said, Bobby was found with his hands tied behind his back. We know that you have guns. The fact that the girls were dressed in their PJs. This was January, remember? So it was cold. They had no shoes, and Bobby didn't have his glasses. So clearly, the cops were like, come on, dude. Clearly they did not leave that house voluntarily. Oh, and he also tried to say that he did have sex with Amanda, but it was, quote, consensual. Bro, no. She's 13. No. I don't care. No. And on August 3rd, 1981, Howard was officially charged with all 3 murders. And he was charged with these 3 murders in the commission of a kidnapping. Now, in order to prove capital murder, the prosecution had to prove Howard had not only killed all 3 of them, but had done so in the commission of another felony, which is why Howard tried to say over and over again that Bobby, Melanie, and Amanda all left Bobby's house of their own free volition. And despite confessing to authorities, at his preliminary hearing, Howard pleaded not guilty. His trial happened in April of 1982, and it only lasted for 2 days. It was pretty quick. Howard's attorney did bring up Howard's troubled past, but not in too elaborate detail or anything. And the only witness that his lawyer called was his mother and a psychologist. Now, the defense had tried to get Howard's confession thrown out, arguing that due to Howard's mental capacity, officers shouldn't have even tried to question him, and that his confession was given involuntarily because he didn't really know what he was doing. They're trying to say that literally due to his mental ability, that he literally could not confess voluntarily. A judge disagreed though, pointing to the fact that Howard was married, had a child, and had a job, though he was a drifter, but this all proved that he was able to function in society. And so the judge allowed Howard's confession into evidence. And of course, the jury found Howard guilty of first-degree murder. And though the jury knew that Howard suffered from mental disability and, had a low IQ and the mental capacity of an 8-year-old, they returned a sentence of death via the gas chamber. And Howard was sent to death row at Mississippi State Penitentiary. Now, in August of that same year, he was tried for Bobby's murder, so that was just for Amanda's murder that he had gotten the death penalty for. I forgot to mention that. When he went on trial, that was just for Amanda's murder. And so in August, he then was tried for Bobby's murder, and for that, he was given a life sentence. Now, his execution date was scheduled for March 8th, 1984, which of course wouldn't happen because of the appeals process and whatnot. And now Howard was convicted of capital murder for killing Bobby and Amanda, but he was never officially brought to trial for Melanie's murder. And that was because they were waiting to see how his death penalty appeal went in Amanda's case. I guess they figured what was the point of trying him if he wasn't going to get, if he was going to be put to death anyway. But I'm not sure why they would try him for Bobby's then. Why not try him for Melanie's too? So I was a little unclear on that. Like I said, man, there's a lot of questions in this case, and some of the details were just kind of scarce and sketch, and I don't understand why. Now, in 1984, Howard attempted to appeal his sentence, arguing that his past mental problems and turmoiled childhood, that they should have been presented in more detail at his trial. He was also trying to get his confession thrown out, again, arguing due to his low IQ and mental status that, he didn't really know what he was confessing to, and was also arguing against the kidnapping charge. Again, probably because that's what cinched it for the death penalty case, right? Is the capital murder. So maybe that's why he was trying to get the kidnapping charge thrown out. But the Mississippi State Supreme Court rejected his appeal. They did not agree. And in 1985, they also upheld his sentence. However, so he's sitting all these years and decades on death row. In 2002, the U.S. Supreme Court, they determined that those who were legally defined as mentally challenged could not be sentenced to death. And so became a new fight where now the prosecution was trying to argue that Howard did not meet this definition and that he was eligible for the death penalty. And they were trying to argue that hey man, yeah, Howard doesn't count for this still because he was found to be competent to stand trial back in 1982. And so for a few years, of course, that is now the new fight that's being had between Howard's defense team and prosecutors. That Howard does fit that legal definition of being mentally challenged and thus needed to be taken off death row. And it wasn't until 2007 until Howard's attorneys were able to successfully appeal his death penalty sentence. They were able to prove that Howard was borderline mentally challenged per the legal and state definition, and his sentence was then commuted to life without parole in 2008. So I read an article from 2021, and it said that he was ultimately never prosecuted for Melanie's murder even after his sentence was commuted from the death penalty to life without parole. But yet I read that his commuted sentence was commuted to 3 life sentences. So I don't know. Maybe that was a symbolic thing for Melanie since he wasn't officially prosecuted for her murder. I don't know. So when Howard's sentence was commuted to life without parole, he was able to move into a bigger cell, obtain a job in the cafeteria, and he can now go out in the yard and not be locked up for 23 and a half hours every day. I also read that he did learn to read and write. And you would think that was the end of the story. All right, they caught the killer and he's behind bars and, got his death sentence commuted to life without parole. But that's not where the story ends. Howard was back in the news again in 2021. So this is kind of a wild, twisty tale here. All right, so in 2018, Virginia resident Christine Marie Sally, she was on a quest to find her biological mother, okay? Never knew her biological parents. And she was on a quest to find her biological mother. She had been adopted when she was only 2 months old and taken from her mother's custody. She was adopted by her half-uncle. So even though she knew her nuclear family, her mother's information, her specific information was really limited and murky. So yeah, even though her half-uncle was, on her mother's side, information about her mother specifically remained very murky and not really a lot of information was out there. She knew that her mother's name was Pamela Pam Diane Duffy. She had played the flute in high school, had obtained a GED, and had begun going by her middle name in her teens. But that was about the extent that Christine knew about her mom. That was it. That was all the info that she knew. Her half-uncle and her grandparents, they did try to locate Christine's mother. A family member even worked in the FBI and had even ran Pam's social security number to see if there was any activity or anything, and nothing. Now, curious to find out about her biological roots, Christine eventually hired a private investigator. And in December of 2020, that private investigator submitted Christine's DNA to a site called GED Match. And it's an online service that searches for DNA matches among DNA files from multiple sources. The results identified a parent-child relationship between a Ludlow, California murder victim, a Jane Doe that they had been unable to identify for years. So Jane Doe number 10 was found alongside a John Doe number 29 by an archaeologist on November 17th, 1980. Talking is hard. And this archaeologist stumbled upon John and Jane Doe in the Mojave Desert, a few miles east of the town of Ludlow. Both victims were nude, had died from a combination of blunt force trauma and gunshot wounds, and neither had any ID on them. They theorize that the pair had been there about 6 to 8 months before they had been found, and for 40 years, efforts to identify them turned up nothing. And it wasn't until Christine's DNA was submitted that Jane and John Doe were finally identified. So turns out that Jane Doe was Christine's biological mother, Pamela, who was born April 6th, 1959. And she was estimated to only be about 20 or 21 years old when she was murdered. The John Doe, it turned out, was William Billy Everett Lane, who was born on May 23rd, 1960. And he was estimated to only be about 19 or 20 years old when he was murdered. So very, very young babies. And I'm not exactly sure when, but apparently Howard had been a person of interest in their deaths for quite some time. And apparently he had been a suspect for, such a while that investigators had been, I guess, constantly trying to get an interview with Howard behind bars, but his attorneys would consistently not allow it. But finally, in November of 2017, investigators were finally able to talk to Howard. Now, he confessed to killing a couple out in Ludlow when he lived there, but he wasn't much help in trying to identify them. He said he wasn't sure, but he thought the woman had been from Arkansas and had left her daughter behind to hitchhike across the country, and the man she was with, quote, looked like a hippie. Apparently, Howard picked Pamela and William up while they were hitchhiking. They went to Howard's place, where William had some sort of confrontation with Howard after his unwanted sexual advances towards Pamela. Howard shot William in the chest, and it is thought that he then sexually assaulted Pamela before also shooting her in the chest. He then took the two bodies out to the desert, where he buried them in their shallow graves. And when Christine's DNA popped, and investigators discovered they may have an ID for their Jane Doe, they contacted Christine, and her private investigator presented an adoption form that they had obtained, and it listed Christine's mother as Pamela. The DNA match was then confirmed by the California Department of Justice in April of 2021. Christine also told investigators that she had been informed that her mother had associated with a man only known as Digger Lane, and she planned to meet up with him in Virginia when he was released from prison. And this was in late 1979, early 1980. And the plan was to meet up after Digger got out of prison and hitchhike across the country. After searching records, investigators were pointed in William's direction, and they discovered he had a listed Florida address. After searching there, authorities located William's family, and after DNA samples from them were submitted, his identification was also confirmed. Now, both Pamela and William, they were known as transients with occasional run-ins with the law, and this was, descriptions given by their own families, and neither of their families had reported them as missing people. It hadn't been until the last few years that their families actually started contemplating, maybe they're dead. William's mother, Sandra Blair, She told investigators her and her family assumed, quote, Billy was off doing his own thing. She said she assumed that his father and William's siblings had filed a missing persons report, and it wasn't until his identity was confirmed many years later that she discovered that that hadn't been, and that her son had actually been sitting in San Bernardino County in California since 1980, unidentified. Sandra had had William when she was only 14, and when she and William's father divorced in 1972, she was not in her son's life as much because his father had primary custody. All in all, Sandra had 8 children, with William being the oldest. She had gotten into some minor scrapes with the law, usually involving writing bad checks, and her ex-husband's new wife and him ended up adopting 7 of Sandra's children. William was the only one who had refused. William did well in school and did help care for his 7 other siblings, but it is said that his parents' divorce was really rough on him, and he started running away at 14 years old. He got into some minor scrapes with the law, and the last time Sandra had seen her son was in early 1979. He had visited her in Jacksonville. Now, legally, the two were not even supposed to be talking to each other because they were both each on probation. He had asked his mother for some money to help support him and his girlfriend, who Sandra later believed was probably Pamela. More information about Pamela did come out since her identity was confirmed. Christine had been taken from her and placed into protective custody when Pamela's car had broken down in Virginia. She was with William. Pamela later made her way down to Mobile, Alabama, and she informed her mother that she was waiting for William to be released from prison. He had been caught stealing diapers and formula for Pamela, and this is when Pamela informed her mother of her and William's plans to travel the country. On June 8th, 1980, Pamela officially signed away her parental rights over Christine, and Christine is still searching for her biological father. Turns out the man listed on her birth certificate is not her biological father. It was not a DNA match. And as far as Howard being charged with Pamela and William's murders, as of April 2021, it looks like they're still considering on whether or not to charge him. And kind of seems like a abrupt end, but yeah, that was the story of Howard Neal. And again, I said this in the beginning, what makes this case frustrating for me personally is that this was so easily preventable. So easily preventable. Why aren't people like Howard taken care of? Why did he age out of Ellisville? Like, it seemed, at least from some of the reports that I read, that he was actually thriving there. Like, that was actually a good place for him. And yeah, he clearly had behavioral issues, right? Like, they even noted that in his record that he had problems in controlling emotional outbursts. And I just don't understand, especially with his low IQ and his mental capacity, the dude couldn't even read or write. And I'm sorry, I don't understand this nonsense of like, oh, well, he was married, had a kid, and had a job, so clearly he wasn't that mentally challenged. Bro, it's really not that hard to have sex. Like, I would like to know, how much of a father was he? Was it mainly Darla who picked up the slack? And as far as a job, do you know how many jobs are just repetitive? So I'm sorry, like, I feel a little different than, about Howard than I do like normal serial killers. Is like, I feel like this dude just didn't have a chance. Like, he should have never been just tossed to, like, he was just tossed into society at 19 years old. He couldn't read or write. He had no education, no family, no support. Like, I don't know what happened with Dr. Norwood. Like, I don't know because it seemed like he, cared for Howard. But remember, it was so easy to just sort of like up and transplant your life somewhere back then. So Howard traveled a lot, so they must have just fallen out of contact. And it just sucks that because we have a system that doesn't want to care for people like Howard, at least, check on them and monitor them, 5 people lost their lives, 2 of which were little girls, like little children. Look, I'm glad Howard is locked up, but again, like, I don't think he belongs in a penitentiary. He should honestly be in like some sort of mental health facility, but it's just frustrating because it should have never come to this. He should have been taken care of of from the get-go. But I don't know, maybe I'm just a bleeding heart. Please let me know, like, what you feel about this case. Like, yeah, what he did was horrible, and it sucks that, like, now 5 innocent people lost their lives for no reason. That's another thing. There's no rhyme or reason to this. And I don't know if it's because, remember, there were those behavioral reports of him where he had, like, these episodes where he couldn't control his emotional outbursts, and it just sucks. Like, if we just had a system that cared for people like Howard, that, you know, monitored them, made sure that, you know, like, they were okay in life and had everything set up, I wonder if this would have happened, if this, you know, could have been prevented. I'd like to think, yeah, that it could have been. But please let me know your thoughts. I would love to know what you think about this case. If you've ever heard of Howard Neal, I've never heard of him. I'd never really heard of this case. And yeah, what do you guys think? Do you think they should prosecute him for Pamela and Williams, like, murder? Or do you think it's enough that they were, like, identified? I'm super curious to know what you guys think about this, because I'm not sure. I don't know how I feel about it. Like, should we spend the resources and stuff to try him when he's already locked behind bars for life? Or maybe we should, because it's like, you know, it is justice. It's justice delayed, but at least it's justice. I don't know. I'm super curious to know what you all think. And I think that will do it for this week for Crime Dive. I hope this wasn't too short of a one. Again, I tried so hard to find a lot of information, guys, all right? I tried really hard. There's just, maybe because it's an older case, and maybe the fact that the time period it happened in, you know, when Howard was born, like, records were not, you know, they weren't digital, and, you know, they were handwritten, and I'm sure record keeping wasn't the best or the greatest. So I did the best I could. Hope it wasn't too short, but don't worry, I have got, don't you worry. The rest of this month, we've got lots of cases with so much to say. And I know I did black lipstick again. I don't care. I love black lipstick. I think it needs more love. It needs to be regular. It needs to be normalized more, I feel. But anyway, yeah, that will do it for this week for Crime Dive. Happy June. I almost said July. Happy June. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. I am very anxious and excited to talk with y'all again next week. And until we meet again next week, I hope you stay safe, take care of yourself out there, have a wonderful, excellent week. Remember, don't be a dick, all right? Just be a decent person. It's really not that hard. And yeah, it just kind of gives you, like, a good feeling inside just to be a good person, you know? And you never know. You never know what that can do for someone's day. You know, someone could be having, like, the crappiest day ever, and someone just being decent, like opening the door for them, smiling at them, you know, saying please or thank you. It could just really brighten someone's day. You have no idea. All right, y'all. I will see you next week. Bye-bye.